Hey everyone, welcome to Corona class, where I'm going to tell you a little bit about world history. Today, we're going to be discussing the significant turn of the century into the 20th century, when the United States started to test the waters of international policy. Now, up to this point in U.S. history, the United States has not really been recognized as a geopolitical powerhouse, but more of an isolated but also prosperous nation. Besides trade, immigration, and a few wars with Great Britain back in the 18th century, the United States has mainly stuck to issues within its own borders. Well, its growing borders. But as the 20th century looms nearer, the United States has begun to recognize the need to become more present in current trends. One of the biggest trends, besides the massive influx of immigrants moving into the United States from Europe, but not China due to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, was the trend of military modernization. You see, European powers have always had their hands in the global pie, with England at one point owning 24% of the world's surface area. It is easy to connect the dots between powerful navies leads to a lot of resources. Many other European nations took after this trend, while making some alliances here and there and also producing the Monroe Doctrine, a document keeping European powers away from more colonization of the Western Hemisphere. The United States was behind the trend. The main reason the United States is way behind this trend is that the massively expensive and destructive Civil War only happened about 25 years before this point that we're talking about today. While the United States was infighting, European powers were opening up trade around the world, especially with China, expanding global influence and building big boats. In the mid-1880s, Alfred Thayer Mahan, an American naval historian and tactical mastermind, if you agree with the Mahanian doctrine, close relationship between naval strength and availability of resources, was closely studying the naval trends happening in Europe. You see, he saw that many European powers were building fresh, modernized navies with a new class of battleship known as the pre-dreadnought class. And countries like Great Britain, France, Germany, and even Russia were building massive new metal and steel ships for modern sea supremacy. And here's what our navy looked like for comparison.
We can take it, we're American!
But Mahan knew we couldn't, so he began to pressure Washington to begin modernizing its own navy.
We need better boats!
And Washington said, well, if we don't, we'll be at their mercies, which isn't really merciful. Which was accurate considering that most of these European powers started murdering each other on the battlefield about 20 years later in World War I. So, the United States began modernizing its navy, first step in a long road to becoming recognized as a global powerhouse. But a lot more would have to occur before that's the case, which we'll cover in further episodes. But for the rest of today's episode, let's kick it over to the shaka-shaking, peace-loving, ohana-filled beaches of Hawaii, where the United States is imitating its European neighbors in the art of imperialism by taking over a foreign country. So the story begins about 70 years before 1898, when American missionaries and farmers began moving to the Hawaiian Islands. American settlers were at peace with the Hawaiians, even getting to vote in the elections and participate in other Hawaiian practices. But over time, some of these Americans began influencing Hawaiian politics more heavily. One of those main influencers was Sanford B. Dole.
The fruit company?
You see, Dole and his other rich American farmer friends created a club called the Hawaiian League, a group of, Americans who wanted Hawaii to be annexed or become a territory of the United States, mainly so they wouldn't have to pay import taxes when they're selling sugar and fruits to the United States. While a lot of Americans enjoyed democratic freedoms on the islands of Hawaii, when the king died, his sister, Queen Liliuokalani, took power, and she wanted to take a little bit more power away from the foreigners and give it back to the Hawaiian people. Now, the Hawaiian League did not like this, and so they hatched a plan, along with the minister to Hawaii, John L. Stevens, to overthrow the Queen and appeal to the United States for annexation. So the coup, with the help of 300 American soldiers aboard the U.S. cruiser Boston, was successful in January of 1893. The Queen had been replaced by the Republic of Hawaii, led by the fruit man himself, Sanford B. Dole. But President Grover Cleveland was like,
"Hey, that wasn't cool."
and he reinstated Queen Liliuokalani, which didn't really work because Dole was like,
I'm not going anywhere.
and Grover Cleveland was like,
"Well, I don't want to overthrow an American republic by force, because that would be bad for my image."
So Dole and the Republic of Hawaii kept its power in Hawaii as an independent government until the election of William McKinley, who then brokered a deal with Dole, making Hawaii territory of the United States. Of course, the native Hawaiian people were not happy. Under the leadership of Queen Liliuokalani, they proposed a memorial to the United States, calling for a cease in the annexation. In the memorial, they wrote about how John L. Stevens and the Hawaiian League forcibly and illegally took power away from the Queen and her loyal subjects. But in the spirit of peace, as is the Hawaiian way, they concluded this memorial with the following: "And your memorialists, for themselves, on behalf of the Hawaiian people, and for the residents of the Hawaiian Islands, pledge their faith that if they shall be accorded the privilege of voting upon said questions at a free and fair election to be held for that purpose, and if a fair count of the votes shall be cast in such election shall show a majority in favor of the such annexation, these memorialists and the Hawaiian people will yield a ready and cheerful acquiescence to said project." Whew! Basically, they were asking for a chance for the Hawaiian people to vote on the annexation. And if through a free and fair election, most of the people in Hawaii wanted to be annexed by the United States, they would yield the government happily. But in 1898, the Spanish-American War broke out. Due to Spain's vast influence in the islands of the Pacific, the United States Congress saw a lot of value in the shiny new naval base at Pearl Harbor on Oahu in Hawaii, and Hawaii was officially annexed by the United States. So now the United States has gained new territory strategically located for its upcoming war, and has a modernized navy to go toe-to-toe with these European powers. And as it has been previously stated, these are two of the steps that the United States will take in its journey to becoming a global powerhouse. Next time, we'll be here discussing how the Spanish-American War will forever change America's destiny on the world stage, while rumbles of war loom in Europe. Until next time, I'm Mr. Smith.